Hello, hello. Greetings, everyone from all over the world. I'm Madeline DiNono, President and CEO of the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. And with me is our amazing ASL interpreter, Gabe Gomez. So hi, Gabe. And we are so excited for this conversation about Wolfwalkers. I'm just gonna open up with a quick poem and then throw it to Gina. So the famous Irish poet, Eben Boland said, "Love will heal what language fails to know." And that's really at the heart of our conversation today. So without further ado, welcome Gina Davis for opening remarks.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. It's a very exciting day for us. And thank you to Tomm, Ross, and Nora for being here with us. You'll be hearing from them a little bit later. We are thrilled to have you today to share the story of Wolfwalkers with all of us. And first and foremost, I want to congratulate you on the success of this film. Congratulations on your recent BAFTA nomination for Best Animated Feature. And the film snagged one of only 3 coveted spots. Fantastic, well-deserved. What I love so much about this film is the way you gave such strong voices to the 2 female leads. We get to watch these 2 young women find friendship in the most unlikely of places. And of course, the stunning animation and the beautiful music, it really draws you in and just leaves you wanting more. I know everyone is going to really enjoy the discussion. So for now, Madeline, I will hand it back to you.
Thanks, Gina. Thanks so much. So before we introduce our 2 directors and our producer, we're all about shameless promotion. So I just need to tell you all out there watching, Golden Globe nomination for Best Animated Feature, BAFTA for Best Animated Feature, PGA for Best Animated Feature, ADG Excellence in Production Design, Gotham Independent Film Award for Best International Feature, and this morning, ACE Award nomination for cinematography. So kudos on that. So I want to introduce our illustrious panelist, Tomm Moore, director, co-founder of Cartoon Salon, which has produced amazing films. All of our panelists have been multiple Oscar nominated. So their credits are too long, but as a refresher, The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, both were Oscar nominated. And of course now with Wolfwalkers. So welcome, Tomm. Thank you for joining us today. Ross Stewart, who's been an artist also and moving into directing, again, multi-hyphenate, Oscar nominated, also co-founder of Cartoon Salon and working on Secret of the Kells and Song of the Sea, respectively. Welcome so much, Ross. And our producer, Nora Twomey, who was Oscar nominated for The Breadwinner, and also, critical to this film. So I just wanted to say, welcome all of you. And I want to start with themes, okay? Because it's the themes are so critical. And I do want you to explain why it took 7 years. But, let's talk about gender equality, which is at the heart of the Institute, and 2 ferocious female leads, which is just pretty much unheard of. So can you just talk a little bit about, and also whose idea was it to change Robyn from a boy to a girl? So any of you, can talk about this, but let's just talk about the fabulous empowerment with these 2 female lead characters.
Oh,
Tomm, do you want to go first?
sure. Wow, it's a lot. Well, yeah, early on, we had the idea that it would be a story about empathy and about 2 kids from very different worlds, from very different backgrounds, and how they could be friends despite the fact that their parents or the society that they were coming from were antagonistic towards each other. So that was kind of the heart of the thematic story that we kept coming back to, and also trying to speak about empathy between you know, people and animals, and speaking about speciesism and how sometimes whenever we ascribe negative human attributes to an animal like a wolf, then that becomes used against humans as well. So at the time, there was in the 1650s, Ireland was known as Wolfland and was seen as this untamable savage land, and that was kind of the colonial army's reason for trying to wipe out the wolves, you know. So we wanted to speak to those themes, and it made sense to have it set in that time period, because that's when the wolves were wiped out. And also we had the idea that a little child who came with their father, and the father was hunting wolves, and if that child made friends with a little local kid, and that kid was actually one of the wolves the father was hunting, that would be the nugget of the conflict, and that would embody those themes that we wanted to deal with. But yeah, very first draft, Robyn was a little boy, and it wasn't really working because we were inventing conflict for a little boy in that world to come up against. A little boy in that world who wants to be a hunter or who was trying to fit in would have had a much easier time than a little girl. And so I'm not sure whose idea it was to flip the gender. I feel like we got the note from quite a few people early on. And when we did, it all kind of clicked into place and it made a lot more sense. And there was a bigger theme that we didn't realize was there, and that was strengthened so much because we were dealing with this matriarchal ancient pagan world in Ireland, and this patriarchal world that was coming in with the colonizing force from England. And the fact that we had this little girl who was seeing a world where she could be free, as opposed to the world that she was expected to just fit in and keep her head down. It just made that theme all the stronger, more powerful.
And one of the pleasant things that happened when Robyn did become a girl in like the second or third draft is that when she met Mebh, she met her exact counterpart. You know, she could see herself in that position. Whereas I think with a boy girl, there will always be some kind of like, you know, barriers or differences, especially in 1650, you know. Whereas Robyn could see, here's a little girl living in the forest and living free and doing whatever she wants to do. And I'm a girl and I'm living in this town and I'm being told exactly what to do and I have no agency. So there was a direct comparison there, which I think was one of the pleasant things about changing the gender of Robyn.
Yeah, I think as well as that, there was just the freedom I think that the story team had. I know that like people like Giovanna and Louise who are working on the story team with the script, just the physicality of the characters was just something that was really nice to explore, and the freedom that they had on this film to explore that fully and to get the girls really working with nature as well in a way that didn't really have the way that you guys have, you know, such boundaries for everything that happens in the town, and everything is literally kind of enclosed. And then when, you know, the everything that you do with nature, which is much freer and a freer form of expression, it was really unusual to have characters, especially like Mebh actually, who just did not apologize for her existence, did not ask permission for anything, and she was just and I don't want to like use the expression like force of nature or anything like that, because again, that can be used as a kind of an odd expression that's kind of you know, used for women in particular. But she wouldn't have those boundaries or you wouldn't understand them even. I think there was something quite refreshing about that. So she wasn't just a wild girl or just you know, she made her own definition, and I think that was born of you know, certainly you guys and Will, but certainly of the story team as well, that all were allowed to have their own freedom of expression and to add to those themes in a way that felt very personal for them.
So one of the things that we look at a lot is, you know, when there are two female leads, what are they talking about? Do they have their own sense of agency? And if you really look into the dialogue between, you know, Robyn and Mebh, I mean, they really are so unstereotypical for the types of dialogue, and particularly with Mebh on that. Can you go a little bit deeper on that in terms of when you were doing different drafts or when you were bouncing it off of each other in terms of who would say what or how they would say it? Was there anybody in your real lives? Tomm, I know you have a granddaughter, but I just don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that you kind of.
I was going to say, I like your I like your logo. If she can see it, she can be it. And my granddaughter's 3 at the moment, and whatever she watches, she acts out. So now she acts out being Mebh and howls at the howls at the moon like a wolf whenever she sees Mebh, and she wants to be just like Mebh. So it is really true that little girls see themselves in it. And sorry, I cut you off there a little bit. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. It's just the dialogue in the script
Yeah,
is really, it really defies, gender, gender stereotypes. So I just didn't know in terms of looking at their dialogue and who said what and how they said it, kind of how that came to be, because both characters have such a strong sense of, agency.
there was
I think we were probably all inspired by the strong females in our lives. I mean, like my mother was a feminist in Ireland back in the 60s and 70s, and really, like stood up for herself and risked a lot to be so kind of strong-minded in the face of the Catholic Church, who was quite dominant at that time. So I really got inspired by her even from teenage years. And I think, when I was looking for Mebh's kind of like self-determination, I definitely would have been inspired by that. But I think Tomm, you probably would have been inspired by your mother too, because she was quite strong and forceful, yeah, and your wife as well.
Like 3 sisters, and I based Robyn's design a little bit on my wife, Lisa Lot. But I was thinking, I used to love reading independent comics. I still love reading independent comics. And there was a cartoonist called Alison Bechdel, and she made a comic called Funhouse, and she came up with the Bechdel test, which is, have you heard of that? Yeah, where
We use it all the time. We love that test.
Yeah, because I remember reading that years ago when I first was reading independent comics, and it opened up my eyes to that. And we talked about it a little bit with Will and with the editors to make sure we passed the Bechdel test if we were going to have 2 female leads, But I don't know, the girls really brought it to life too. Eva Whittaker and Honor Neefsey, like when we cast them for the part, like we had idea of who the characters were and we had designed them and everything. And I guess everyone had, like Nora mentioned, some of the story artists who were really into those characters and really put a lot of themselves into it. But they really came alive when we cast the voices. And the girls, their friendship that we kind of captured, their own personal friendship that was growing as they were recording the voices. I think we captured that, and I think that brought a lot to the dialogue and that natural spark off each other, and we allowed them to sort of find their own way of saying all the lines so that it felt natural,
And I think like Tomm and myself and Will, we were very aware that we were all like 3 middle-aged guys, and I think we asked advice as much as we could. I remember asking Giovanna and Louise about like how Mebh or Robyn might act, or what they might say based on their childhood memories, But one of the surprising things was when we changed the dialogue, or when we changed Robyn's gender from boy into girl, we didn't have to change that much dialogue, because I think we're becoming aware that gender is quite fluid nowadays, and you can have like little boys that are more feminine and little girls that are more like tomboys, and really dialogue can just be used for either gender now. It's a child that can be a child, and so we didn't have to change that much of Robyn's dialogue between herself and Mebh. It was just kind of, if it felt natural. Yeah.
It was more her relationship with Bill that changed. Her relationship with Mebh was kind of the same, but her relationship with Bill was different, because now Dad was all overprotective and afraid of her being seen as a witch or something, stepping outside the bounds.
One of the things that influenced us with Robyn and Mebh's relationship was the old tale Gilgamesh, where the 2 characters meet, and they each have like a contrast in character, and only by coming together can they each fulfill the missing parts of each other. So Mebh has total freedom, but she has very little responsibility, and Robyn is the opposite. She has no freedom, but she has all this responsibility kind of dumped on her, and these rules dumped on her. So really they have to come together to become like whole in themselves. So really that was the main focus of the dialogue between them.
Nora,
That's also
on that?
Oh yeah, well, just what I suppose what's unique about it as well is that it's set in Kilkenny, so we all live in Kilkenny. Tomm and Ross grew up in Kilkenny, so the way that Mebh speaks, kids speak like that here, and you can hear it a little bit in Tomm's accent for sure, and some in Ross's as well. So they're just, there's one thing to think about being boy, girl, or how somebody might behave, or how somebody might behave back then, but there's I suppose, a fundamental just kind of truth and exploration to the characters that kind of just comes through. So you can hear, Ross and Tomm are very much inspired by nature and energized by nature. And you can hear, I think, for me, anyway, Robyn is kind of our way in. Robyn, I think, feels like our audience's way into the film, and then Mebh is the things that she meets and the everything that the opposition with which she's presented, the force by which Robyn has to grow. She cannot move around Mebh, so she has to dance with her in a sense. But the dialogue is refreshingly Kilkenny, so it's nice. And again, sometimes when when you're making a film, especially in a place like Ireland, you're expected to, especially for, say, American audiences, you're expected to change the dialogue a little bit, make it a little bit more universal. But what was nice about this, and actually The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, was that they're very local, and that lets the audience come forward a little bit and immerses them more in the world of the film, rather than bringing the film out to the audience. And it's a different kind of experience. You have to work a little harder, maybe sometimes, to understand what characters are saying, but you're rewarded for that by feeling that you're part of a place where the dialect and the accents are formed by their environments.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was very refreshing that it wasn't kind of a neutralized kind of accent. And so let's just stay on this a little bit more. Can you talk a little bit more about Honor and Ava Whitaker, who respectively play Robyn and Mebh, because that voice, just really brings it forward. Did you have them in mind, or how did you approach the distinction between the two girls and the kind of voice actors, and how did you find them? How did they come into the project?
Can you talk, Ross, a bit about casting?
Well, yeah, we worked with casting agency Louise Kiley Casting, which cast the net out very far and wide, because we did want Robyn to be voiced by obviously an English actress, and someone who came from the north of England, because within England, we wanted the Lord Protector's world to be much more southern England, and then like Bill and Robyn to be from a kind of a more hard kind of like, maybe, I wouldn't say working class, but maybe a bit more down to earth, or a bit more like living with nature. So we kind of imagined that they'd be from the north of England, and we did imagine Sean Bean would be playing Bill if we could get him. So it had to be an actress that could have the same kind of accent as Bill. And Honor Nisi was one of maybe 50 to 100 casting tapes that we got in. I can't remember the exact number, but even her demeanor and everything, it just immediately shouted out Robyn to us. And I think as soon as we played it to other people on the story team and the editor, they were all like, yeah, she's perfect, absolutely perfect. And she had like a big professional resume. She had worked in TV and film before, and at such a young age, that was just so surprising, And then Eva was very much a contrast to that, in that Louise, we wanted Louise to cast the net out very far across Ireland and get someone who sounded like she came from the country. As Nora was talking about, the dialect for Mebh, she really had to sound like she wasn't from a city and wasn't from somewhere too gentrified. And she had to have this kind of like rough, kind of like energy of a little kid who grew up with wolves about her. And Eva's audition, she just had that energy. She has that husky voice, as if she'd been roaring all her life, and she was leaning into the camera and she was doing this line saying, I'm gonna get my wolves to eat you, and it really was like, just like Mebh, except if she had a big mane of red hair, it would have been just perfect. It would have been exactly like Mebh. But Eva then didn't have a professional resume, she had only done school drama, so it was a bit more of a gamble, but we were just blown away by her enthusiasm to learn. And like, we did a workshop early on to see like if she could get all the low parts, because Mebh has to be very, very sad and hit highs and lows and everything. And Eva had done her homework as soon as, like beforehand, she had been practicing at home. We even got little videos of her practicing roaring at home and doing lots of like little Mebh impersonations. And she just blew all of her socks off at the audition, or at the workshop. And then by the time the dialogue came, Eva and Honor had formed this little friendship, as Tomm was talking about. So because they were all surrounded by adults, these two little kids, you could really get a sense of the kind of warmth and the exploration. The fact that Honor was a couple of years older, there was a real kind of exploration between the two characters, and they really formed a nice little friendly bond on set. And I think that comes across in the dialogue performance. It's lovely.
Absolutely. Nora, Tomm, any comments you want to add?
I remember remarking at the recording that I was glad that I didn't have a kid that was so talented as Eva or Honor, because I wouldn't be able to believe them. They were such good actors, you wouldn't be able to believe them if they were up to no good. They could get away with murder, I'd say. But Eva in particular, really, you know, Honor was so talented and we were so lucky together. But Eva in particular, as Ross said, she came to know the character so well that, you know, she was telling us what Mebh would do by the end of it. And so we were all of us middle-aged guys were listening to 9-year-old Eva, and she was absolutely right all the time.
It was interesting though as well, because I remember when you had, you know, when you had your you know, all of the different actors who had come to try out for the parts, looking at the character designs as well as hearing the voices. So I never, I try not to look at the actors when they're auditioning for something, because you can get really, you know, their physicality and how they come across on camera is one thing, but how their voices work for animation is another thing, and how well they suit. So I always try to not look. So I remember with Eva and Honor, just looking at the character designs and listening to their voices, and you could tell then, yeah, absolutely as well, that, you know, that Tomm and Ross were really onto something special with the dynamic between the two, the musicality, because you have to listen to the voices even before they meet, how they sit together and how you get, you know, the huskiness, you know, the versus, you know, the different qualities in their voices, the accents, the tones, and looking at the character designs rather than the actors as well, because it can be, yeah, it can give you a really strange sensation when you're just hearing the voice just by itself, and isolating it by itself it's interesting for sure.
So, you know, as we talked about, to me, the big theme is really around, you know, love. And the next theme which jumped out at me is love between a father and a daughter, and then a mother and a daughter. And I'd love for you to just talk about that in terms of crafting those characters, their interaction, their dialogue. And one of the things that jumped at me is it could have been easy to make Bill very one-dimensional and just always being mean and always being ferocious and always being, you know, just insensitive, and you didn't. He's so nuanced and so developed. So I'd love for you to talk through those, you know, that set of love between the father-daughter, and then between Mebh and Mo, and just talk through that a little bit more, because I found it to be distinct and very interesting.
We kind of talked a lot early on about different parenting styles, and where Moll was trusting Mebh and giving her responsibility. Bill was afraid, Robyn's dad was afraid to let Robyn have any freedom, and was, you know, overprotective. And obviously he was coming from a place of sorrow himself because they'd lost her mum. And there's always these moments that we come to when we're working with the screenwriter and the storyboarders, where you kind of feel, okay, that's a mythic moment. That feels like a moment that kind of encapsulates everything. And I remember at one point we realized that Bill would hold on so tight to Robyn to try and keep her safe that she'd actually leave her body behind and become a wolf, in order to be free. And so that was like her big coming out moment, where she told him what she was and what she needed to be, and he still couldn't let her go. So she had no choice but to and that's the most heartbreaking moment. And I sort of felt for them, that was the moment in their relationship where Bill just couldn't let her go out of his fear. You know, he's said that he's fearful and that he's afraid of her being in a cage, but he can't let her go, and he's so afraid to let go of her. Whereas we kind of had this other really poignant moment where Mebh and her mum are saying goodbye, and we ended up cutting it out with a movie, but I remember it was important that we played it with the voice actors, and we even storyboarded because we knew where we were coming from. And that was a moment where Moll was leaving Mebh in charge of the pack and trusting her to do that while she went to find somewhere safe. So we kind of had those two moments in our minds as the anchor points of those two relationships and those two parenting styles. Yeah.
I think the love between Mebh and Moll is really, like, I find that terribly sad, in that you know, Mebh should by rights lead the whole pack to safety, because like the survival of the pack is what she's been entrusted with. But she loves her mother so much that she just can't leave. And really, when she goes bounding into town to try and find her that time, you know, just with one little girl's aggression against the whole city, it's such a true love for her mother that makes her go up against this entire town and you know, risk death and everything. And Moll then, on the other hand, only is thinking of the safety of Mebh and the wolves, and will gladly sacrifice herself just to ensure that they're all safe. So there's it's really tragic, like, and it has brought a tear to my eye many times when Mebh is reaching in through the cage at Moll and is saying, like, what have they done to you, mommy? Like, that's, I don't know, as
Or the
I always
scene,
tear up.
you know what's bad? You know the scene that Iker boarded, where it's just a locked camera and Moll is asleep because she's gone off in her wolf form, and Mebh is telling her all about Robyn that she's met, and it's all just a long sustained scene where it's really nicely animated by Uriel as well. And she's just telling her sleeping mom all about Robyn, and she's all full of gusto. But then slowly she starts to kind of show that she's a bit afraid, and she's wondering, is mommy ever coming back? And we kind of see this little brave little character who's so full of, you know, spunk and everything, kind of break down a little bit and become, and then she kind of uses Moll's sleeping arm to, like, as a blanket as she puts herself to sleep. So that's a really poignant moment too.
But to answer your questions about Bill, though, like wondering about why we didn't make Bill more one-dimensional, I think like in Wolfwalkers, there's kind of two antagonists. You know, there's the Lord Protector putting all the rules and all the control on the city, and then Bill in turn is like, you know, like the knock-on bully, like putting all the rules on top of Robyn. So we didn't really want, you know, like there to be two one-sided antagonists in the film, like, and we wanted to show that there was hope for even someone who's so kind of like brainwashed into a mindset of a society, that even they can turn with the right circumstances if they're forced into a corner, you know, that there's hope for someone like Bill.
It's love, you know, he's acting that way out of love, you know, and he does see Robyn's spirit, and it's kind of breaking his heart to kind of dampen it down, I guess.
Is it's a controlling thing, you know, really at the end of the day. And I see it in my own parenting, you know, the wanting to make things safe for your children, but especially girls. I think, you know, it often come across this, you know, you have to behave in a certain way, or you have, you know, in order to conform, in order to be safe, you have to change your behavior, and so that in order to be safe. And that's what's a really interesting thing, I think, at the core of this film, is that Robyn doesn't, you know, she doesn't, she remains true to herself, and finds, you know, finds the safety in that, and finds her people in that, and finds her way forward through that, rather than conforming to what her a kind of a distorted idea of love, a distorted idea of how to be in this world, or in the world that the characters exist in. And that's it's an interesting theme. It's an interesting thing for both girls and boys to see in film, you know, and something that we don't see that often. So yeah.
So the other theme that I just want you to touch upon, and then we're going to, you know, take a few questions, because I know you have a heart out, is that, you know, you had said in one of your interviews, you know, when you were thinking about the story in general, you were worried about the world becoming more polarized. And there's this huge theme of man versus nature, deforestation, you know, extinction, which taps into what are we doing in our world with climate change and all these other things. So I'd love for you to just touch base on that, and then we'll, you know, jump into a few questions.
I suppose that's the big overarching concern of our times. I was just reading a book called The Great Derangement about how art has somehow failed to address the fact that we're all living under the shadow of what's happening to our biosphere, and we're not able to comprehend it and stuff. So I think it kind of hangs over everything, whether we mention it or not. But I think for Ross and myself, we were both very involved in and concerned about environmental issues, you know, since we were teenagers. And so it was kind of naturally baked into and the setting, the time period was also a time when Ireland lost a lot of its forests deliberately. You know, it was part of the colonization of the country that they cleared the forests. But it's still going on. And you know, just straight after we made Wolfwalkers, we did a small piece for Greenpeace about the destruction of the Amazon. And you know, the megafauna there that's easy to lock onto is the jaguar. But of course, all the wildlife in the Amazon and all life on Earth is threatened by the destruction of the Amazon, you know. So it's sadly very contemporary, even though it's been going on for hundreds of years. It's this mindset that I think there's another really great book I've been reading lately called The Spell of the Sensuous, and it talks about how indigenous people had a different relationship to nature, and I think that's something that we need to rediscover, this idea that we're not here to sort of bend nature to our will, but that we are part of nature. And when we affect nature, it affects us. And it's a two-way street. You know, we live in an animistic world that does have, you know, a spirit of its own, you know, however you want to interpret that. So I think those are big themes that are kind of running through the ideas that Ross and I were interested in exploring, and that were in the sort of ancient folklore that we were looking at, that we were drawing from, like the wolf people of Ossory and stuff.
One of the things about polarization as well, like, I mean, throughout the making of the film, that we saw such polarization happening in so many countries, including in the United States, you know, the right versus the left, or Democrats versus Republicans, or whatever. But one of the really sad things about polarization is that like, saving the actual planet that we all live on becomes either a thing for one side or the other. And really, that should be the thing that unites all of humanity, because we only have this planet to live on. So really, that should be something that stops all arguments, that people shouldn't be arguing over, or if they want to argue over like religion or something, leave it aside and come together to actually, you know, save this environment that we live on. But sadly, it's become a thing that is being polarized in itself, and that's just it's insane.
Nora, any comment from you?
You know, I suppose if this last year has taught us anything, it's that people can change and behavior can change, and radically and quickly, if it's our survival and is at stake. And I think it's interesting. This film was finished during lockdown, with people had to kind of start working from home, and that and you know, how we even make films changed, you know, in that space of time, how we tell stories. And I think yeah, absolutely, the themes of the story kind of the film are kind of echoed in our very recent history, but also the hope is as well, you know, and the hope in the generation of children who are inheriting the world from, you know, are the mess that we've made, but are changing it in ways that certainly my generation wouldn't have thought possible, or wouldn't have even taken on board, or wouldn't have become part of the solution of, or felt that we could, you know, that we were authorized to ask questions about. I think all of this is incredibly hopeful, and I think that. Yeah, like a film like Wolfwalkers is some little part of that, in that it asks questions, or offers hope and solutions, and a way back, and celebrates nature. You know, every artist, there are hundreds of them that worked on this film. Their hands, they work together to express and celebrate the beauty of nature. You know, through the work that they did. And I think that, you know, the fact that that's there now and up there on screens. Forever, so long as there is a forever, you know, is testament to what people can do when they work together. You know.
Absolutely. And one last question before we go to questions is, you know, the movie is steeped in rich history, which I know we could spend hours talking about, but you know, when you think about hope, and you think about kind of the ending scene about them becoming travelers, I read Tomm and Ross that your families, the Moore and the Stewart families, were forced out or forced to move by Oliver Cromwell. And then, you know, at the end of the movie, we see them, you know, becoming travelers and leaving. So there's your personal history, as well as, you know, the history that's, you know, embedded in this. And I just thought that was so fascinating. I'd love to hear you talk about that.
So I
I think it happened to the Moores. I'm not sure it happened to the Stewarts because unfortunately the Stewarts on my father's side of the family, if you go far back enough, they actually came over in the 1700s as part of a plantation. So we were, like, my ancestors were actually part of the colonizing
They
force.
probably kicked my grandfather off his land.
But then again, if you go to my mother's side, they were
Sure.
like from Kilkenny, Wexford, and very much like the kind of farming stock of Ireland. And some of them would have been kicked off the land. All right. So really, my family is kind of a testament to how the colonizing force and the native Irish eventually come together, even if it takes 300 years.
I think that is the story of Ireland and of the colonizers becoming indigenous to place. I mean, it happens to Robyn and Bill in the span of our story, but over the generations, that is what happened in Ireland. But yeah, Oliver Cromwell and that first, well, it wasn't even the first attempt, but that was a major attempt at colonizing the country. That still has echoes through the country today. And so, yeah, it would definitely be strong in our family's lore that we were originally from around here in Laois and were kicked off the land and sent to Connacht in the west, which would happen to a lot of families. And then the traveller connection there was the O'Dowds and the O'Connors as well. And they kept travelling. The Moores went up to Lurgan and ended up becoming working for Lord Lurgan, but the O'Dowds and the O'Connors are still travellers. So
what's interesting with Irish history, though, is that like there has been a constant stream of colonizing forces and the natives moving, and then the colonizers themselves become native to place, as Tom was talking about, and then they're the ones that have to move when the next colonizing force comes in. So like, if you go back far enough to, like, you know, 900 or 1000, the colonizing forces, then the Normans, then became the natives, which had to move. So, you know, it just repeats and repeats and repeats. But one of the things about the travelers is that they kept their own customs and even their own dialects, you know, the Cant language and that. And so that was the only way that some of those customs and traditions survived, because they were kept with the people that traveled around like that. And still exist today because of that. So it was a little nod to that.
I do think it's important, though, because I think there's a little bit of an oversimplification going on these days with the reassessment of the British Empire and colonization and stuff. And another really good book about all this that I read was Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's a Native American woman who's speaking to the fact that we all have to become indigenous to place. Like, okay, she talks about how her people had originally arrived in North America and learned from the people, the non-human people that were there already. And then how what we need to do in order to have any hope for the future is to forget about the fact about, you know, where did you come from originally, where's your family from, and identify with that, but rather become indigenous to place and look at where you're from and how can you help where you are now and respect where you are now and become indigenous to where you are. And I think that's the kind of real hope, you know, rather than kind of going, oh, you're a colonizer bad, oh, you're a native good, but rather that we can look towards the future together and learn from the people who were here before us, you know.
Yeah, but also not to forget our history. You know, Ireland had a very long history with colonization culminating in a famine where over 1 million people died and another million, you know, went and emigrated. So I think, again, it's good to remember your past and that, you know, what your ancestors went through in order, you know, for that to become part of a storytelling way by which you don't make the same mistakes again. I think it's very important to not do that. And so films like Wolfwalkers that kind of speak to a time in history, and especially in children's films, it's not often that you get a children's film that actually speaks to an actual time in history and an actual place and has some accuracy about it. It's an amazing perspective to have, and to be able to put yourself in the shoes of a people whose environment has been changed and they have no say in it, or their livelihood might be taken and they have no say in it. It's an interesting perspective to come at in a family film, you know.
We got to have a little bit of Tarantino-esque artistic license revenge on Oliver Cromwell at the end of the film.
Exactly. So I know people have been clamoring with questions. So I'm going to bring Lisa Emery, who's a director of digital media, on to ask a question. But what we may do for all of you at home that have sent us questions, we will forward it on to the filmmakers, and we will try to get your questions answered if you give us your email in the chat room. So Lisa, take it away.
Thank you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Lisa.
I just wanted to thank everyone who, who is attending this for joining us today. I did put everybody's contact info in the chat, so if you want to follow them, which you totally should, follow Cartoon Salon, everybody involved over there in the chat. Yeah, cool. I wanted to say that personally, I really love this film. I actually was able to see it at a drive-in movie theater about a month ago, and it was a really wonderful and whimsical experience to get to see it kind of like on a huge screen. And I've seen all of your guys' other stuff, so just want to make that comment. But yeah, we have a few comments that have come in through the Q&A box, and also a few that were sent in earlier. So I'll start off with Lynn's, who says, I love the spirit of activism and entrepreneurship that seeps into your films. I'd love to hear more about what it's been like creating these stories as an independent animation studio going up against other players, how that impacts your story development process, and why you think that there aren't more indie animated feature films.
Maybe Nora, do you want to take that?
Well, yeah, you know, I don't think we ever thought of ourselves as going up against anyone. We really, like, you know, Tom and Ross, myself, Paul Young, our partner in Cartoon Saloon, and a number of people that we still work with today, and, you know, people who are spread out through different studios. We came together to start Cartoon Saloon just because we liked drawing, animating, telling stories, and we got a buzz from just each other's work. And because, you know, even to make a short film, you need a team of people. That's what kind of drew us together in the first place. And it was that, and it was quite naive, I have to say, in the first, you know, number of years. We really just did stick to that. Come hell or high water, that's what we wanted to do. And so we did commercials, we did anything we could to keep the lights on. But while our big goal was to make films, if you looked at our business plan back then, it made absolutely no sense. It was kind of like, if we win the lottery, we will, you know, fund our first film or something like that. But the enthusiasm for which we had for the work, and honestly, like the skill of people like Tom and Ross, and you know, the team of people that came together. So from the first 12 to the nearly 200 that we are now, it was that enthusiasm for drawing, for animating, for figuring out what makes a character work. How can you get a character to tell the story? How can you get an audience to invest in a bunch of drawings and have an emotional connection with those bunch of drawings and think that they are, you know, living, breathing human beings who can take you on a journey. So it was always about the art, the stories for us, and it always will be. I think for any of us, once that goes, you know, or if it ever went, I don't think that it would then just be another studio where you could just get a job at another studio. When we started out, we had nothing to lose. We were all really poor. We were just, you know, had come out of student life, and we had literally, we didn't have a huge amount of what we did have, though. We've invested in what we were doing. And again, that kind of continued on. But through the years, I think Tom started blogging when we were making The Secret of Kells. He was one of the first kind of bloggers, you know, putting up some artwork as we were doing it, because again, it was a small co-production. We didn't have to be particularly secretive about it. In fact, we were really, you know, proud and chuffed when somebody would, like, you know, show, you know, retweet or reblog or whatever, you know, a piece of artwork. So it was that, it was a little bit Alice in the Shoemaker. You know, you make a bit of money, then you can invest in another little bit. So we never took on a huge investor or anything like that. Certainly not, you know, in the first, until honestly, the first Oscar nomination, I think, is when we really became solid as a business enterprise. And that certainly, you know, people started to look at us in terms of what we were doing and what we had cultivated. But it meant that we weren't particularly compromised, because a lot of studios, why there aren't many independent animated features, they take about at least 5 years to make. And then it's hard to keep that integrity, because again, if we come from Ireland, if you were looking for a lot of money to make a feature, again, the whole universal thing, make it universal, stop them speaking like Irish people, or stop them, they make it look like, a big studio picture, so the pressure to be somebody else would have been huge. So that's why we stayed quite small. Our budgets are always, quite small, but we try to invest as much onto the screen as we possibly can.
It shows. So unfortunately, we know you all have to go. We want to thank our partners at Apple TV Plus. We want to thank, Nora, Tomm, Ross. Thank you to Gabe. Fingers crossed for you, for Monday. And I do hope you will consider developing a children's educational curriculum to go along with Wolfwalkers, because there's so many great themes that I think would be great for children all over the world. And for those of you who we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, we will follow up with our filmmakers. And I just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you,
Madeline.
so
Thank you,
much.
June.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Really appreciate
Bye-bye.
it. Thanks, everyone.